Remarkably, unlike a lot of other publications that came around at about the same time, both publications are still alive to this very day. Hello, I'm Lawrence and I'm on a quest to uncover all of the memos that Britain and America lost in the pond, and very few memos were more lost than this. It's a cosmic coincidence so insane you won't believe the tiny balls behind your eyelids. And the word cosmic is deeply appropriate here because it just happens to be an anagram of the very medium at the centre of this stunning story. Comics. Or more precisely, comic strips, one from the United States and one from the UK, each featuring a troubled boy. Now, even if you're not a comics nerd, I advise all of you to stick around to see how both countries played their part in one of the biggest coincidences in publication history, starting with the United States of America. Anybody that's picked up an American newspaper in the last 70 years will no doubt be familiar with this comic strip, not to mention its titular character. Dennis the Menace is a troublesome little 5-year-old that you can't help but love. He's routinely accompanied on his escapades by his best friend Ruff. But Ruff isn't another little boy. Ruff is a dog. Ruff! See what I did there? I didn't do it. I think the creators of the comic did it. And speaking of the creators, one of those was the illustrator, Hank Ketchum. He, along with a team of writers, helped to usher in the comic strip now known to Americans as Dennis the Menace. The very first comic strip launched on March 12, 1951. And fun fact, that just happened to be the 57th anniversary of bottled Coke. So have a drink on me. And of course, Dennis the Menace was wildly popular here in the United States. It spawned countless books and TV shows like this one from 1959 to 1963. And on a personal note, I particularly remember the launch of the film in 1993, starring Walter Matthau, Doc Brown from Back to the Future, and Lorraine from Back to the Future, and some child actor who is no longer a child or an actor. And bear in mind, at the time in Britain, this comic strip was not well known, so I remember seeing the premise of the film and thinking, this seems eerily similar to another comic strip that I'd grown up with, except the child in question wasn't British, didn't have dark zany hair, don't comment, and didn't take fashion tips from Freddy Krueger. While it did resemble some of the elements of the comic strip with which I was familiar, the name was shortened simply to Dennis. So even as a 12-year-old boy, I was a little bit confused as to whether this was the same story with which I'd grown up, or if it was just a complete rip-off of it. It was only later on in my life, as in, the last 2 years, that I actually looked up the reasoning behind these changes. First of all, of course, it wasn't based on the comic strip that I'd grown up with, it was based on the comic strip that millions of Americans had grown up with. But that doesn't stop the fact that I'd also grown up with a comic strip by the name of Dennis the Menace, except Dennis the Menace looked like this. And Dennis the Menace's dog, Gnasher, looked like that. Poles apart from the little blonde boy with the cute dog, this Dennis the Menace was a genuine menace to society and all of his friends. Didn't really have any. That was part of the problem. But when I came to learn later on about America's Dennis the Menace, I discovered that there were numerous similarities. Not only were they both called Dennis the Menace, not only did they both have a dog, but they both enjoyed runs in other mediums such as books and television shows. They were both aimed at a similar age group too, so it just got me thinking, whose came first? Who copied who? Was this a case of the British office and then the American office or something of that ilk? Was it a case of, oh, well, we've got the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, let's market it to a British audience and call it Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles? Was it that sort of thing? I didn't know, because if it was indeed a cross-Atlantic replication, it was one of the lesser-known varieties. So, I did what any good comic book journalist would do. Is that a profession? That can't be a real profession. I did some research. It turns out that both countries launched a comic strip called Dennis the Menace without the other's knowledge. That's amazing, and perhaps, not terribly surprising. I mean, Dennis does rhyme with menace. And of course, it's a well-known trope to have the central figure be a little bit of a naughty boy. Okay, fine, but that does beg one other question. In the age of telecommunication, how did two nations launch something of the same name without knowledge of the other? Well, to find out, let's look at how the UK version came about. In 1938, a comic book publisher based in Dundee, Scotland called DC Thomson, not to be confused with DC Comics, launched a comic called the Beano. The Beano went on to be one of the most wildly popular comics in British history. Indeed, in this very year of 2019, the Beano has just celebrated its 5,000th issue. But early on in that history came perhaps one of its most famous comic strips, Dennis the Menace. Interestingly, the comic's editor, George Mooney, came up with the name Dennis the Menace, influenced not by the US version on the other side of the pond, but from a line that he'd heard at a British music hall performance. That line being, "I'm Dennis the Menace from Venice." The comic launched on March 12, 1951 and was a roaring success. Its introduction to the Beano franchise saw sales of the Beano soar through the roof and last to this very day. And it's a testament to its success that, wait, I'm going to stop right there, March 12th, 1951. What happened that day? You're right, that was the 57th anniversary of bottled Coke. It also happens to be the exact same day that the American version of Dennis the Menace launched. That's why neither publisher knew of the other's intention. They launched on the same bloody day. It's like buses, isn't it? You wait for one Dennis the Menace and then two come along at once. Now, a slight disclaimer on that the first issue of Dennis the Menace does bear the date of March 17th, but it was actually distributed to the public on March the 12th. Remarkably, unlike a lot of other publications that came around at about the same time, both publications are still alive to this very day. Furthermore, just like the American film when it came over to Britain, both distributors released their version of Dennis the Menace under a different name when they're marketing it in the other country, which is quite helpful and I suppose in many ways helps to alleviate any of those memos that might get lost in the pond. That's it for this episode. Thank you for tuning in. Is your name Dennis? Are you a menace? Let me know in the comments below. It's unlikely. As ever, if you haven't had a chance to do so, do hit that subscribe button so that my videos don't get lost in the pond. A big shout out to all my patrons without whom none of this would be possible. From the writing to the research to the, cosmic coincidences, every penny helps. If you would like to help this channel grow, you can do so at patreon.com/lostinthepond. Anybody that signs up will get access to my secret live stream, and anybody that pledges $5 or more a month will get that, plus access to my secret podcast and more. Until next time, goodbye. Thank you for watching this episode of Lost in the Pond. Don't forget to hit my stupid little face to subscribe, and please share this video with the world. Hit me up on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook, and if you would like to support this channel, please do so at patreon.com/lostinthepond.